I think more shock and dauntingness was more the feeling I felt. But it was, the thing is, it's...
The final meeting between King Charles and Queen Camilla was never supposed to leave the room. No advisors were present. No official minutes were prepared. Yet within hours, one devastating account had reached Prince William, and what he learned left him frozen in disbelief. Camilla had entered expecting reassurance from her husband. Instead, she walked out after Charles made a decision that quietly shifted the monarchy's future into William's hands. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles summoned her to his sitting room, dismissed the aides, and told the equerry that no one could interrupt them. An equerry is a senior royal aide who manages duties and access around a family member, so the instruction carried weight. The king knew the argument was coming. Tension had grown around transition planning, the process used to prepare duties, households, residences, and authority for the next reign. Camilla feared that once William gained control, her home, staff, ceremonial position, and influence could be reduced without warning. She entered carrying a sealed directive, a formal written order meant to secure those protections before power moved toward the heir. Camilla placed the document before him and asked for his signature. She wanted guarantees that she would retain her royal residence, senior household privileges, and ceremonial status under William's future reign. Charles refused. He pushed the unsigned paper back across the table and told her that the prince would instead receive immediate authority over transition planning and major household decisions. For one stunned moment, she believed he was testing her loyalty. Then the monarch said protecting the crown had to come before protecting either of them, and her confidence broke. Camilla accused him of surrendering their marriage to palace pressure. Charles held his voice steady and insisted the decision was his alone, built over months of concern. A documented account later supplied by a palace insider described the instant she realized William already knew about the proposed protections. Her chair scraped backward. She stood and asked whether her husband had already chosen his son over her. The king did not answer. He simply closed the folder. William received a handwritten summary afterward. He read one sentence twice, lowered the page, and remained silent as the scale of the decision settled over him. The leak revealed what Charles had done, but not what had driven Camilla to demand such extraordinary guarantees. To understand why Camilla entered that room prepared for battle, the palace had to confront the private fears, divided loyalties, and deeply personal history carried by all three people caught inside the crisis. This was never simply a disagreement over rooms, titles, or ceremonial appearances. For Charles, the meeting became a brutal choice between the woman who had endured decades beside him and the son destined to inherit everything he had spent his life waiting to possess. For Camilla, it was a fight against being erased. For William, it was proof that the future crown could no longer remain separate from the wounds of the past. Charles had spent years trying to keep two fragile loyalties from colliding, but the sealed directive forced him to face what he had delayed for too long. The crown, meaning the institution and authority carried by the sovereign, required a stable transfer of power, without rival structures waiting in the shadows. He loved his wife, yet he also knew the prince would one day need complete freedom to shape his own reign. Camilla understood that reality, but she feared what it would mean when the king was no longer there to defend her place. Decades of sacrifice could be reduced to a temporary chapter, and she could be left dependent on a stepson whose trust had never been complete. William carried a different fear. He remembered how private relationships had once torn through his childhood and damaged public faith in the family, and he had sworn that personal history would never again be allowed to weaken the monarchy. His shock did not come from her desire for security. It came from the wording hidden inside her request. The directive, a formal written instruction designed to preserve specific rights, appeared to reach beyond her residence and staff. It could protect influence over appointments, ceremonies, and access to key parts of the royal household. That meant his future authority could be limited before his reign had even begun. Charles later admitted, during a recorded private conversation with a trusted courtier, that he had delayed the confrontation because any final decision would wound either his wife or his son. He feared it might destroy the fragile peace he had spent years maintaining. William felt that cost immediately. Standing alone beside his desk, he folded the handwritten summary, placed it inside a drawer, then pulled it out again. He could not put the matter away because the danger was no longer emotional alone. Catherine watched his expression harden as he explained that this was not simply about Camilla's comfort. It was about whether two competing centers of authority were being created inside one monarchy. She heard the restraint in his voice, but she also heard the old pain beneath it. The emotional stakes explained the confrontation, yet they did not explain why Camilla had chosen that precise moment to force the issue. The answer lay in an earlier royal ceremony, where one carefully delivered instruction humiliated Camilla, alarmed Charles, and convinced William that the palace had reached a point of no return. Weeks before the final meeting, the royal family gathered for what should have been a controlled display of unity. The program had been approved, the movements rehearsed, and every position carefully assigned. But behind one closed door, a brief exchange shattered that appearance. Camilla was told that a ceremonial duty she considered hers would pass to Catherine under William's authority. And the way the message was delivered changed everything. The change did not arrive as a suggestion. It came minutes before a major Commonwealth reception at Buckingham Palace, when an aide quietly informed the Queen Consort that Catherine would lead the principal royal greeting line because the prince had requested it and Charles had approved. A Commonwealth reception is a formal gathering for representatives from nations linked through the Commonwealth, making the leading greeting position a powerful sign of status and future importance. Camilla understood exactly what the switch meant. William had already begun shaping long-term planning, senior appointments, public strategy, and the division of ceremonial duties, while Catherine was being moved closer to the center of the monarchy's next chapter. For years, Camilla had worked beside the king, with influence over royal hosting, household access, and the public order of senior women within the family. Now one short instruction suggested that the palace was learning to function without her. She entered a private anteroom and demanded an explanation. Charles followed, already tense, and told her the adjustment was part of preparing his son and daughter-in-law for the future. But she did not hear reassurance. She heard confirmation. The monarch was asking her to smile through a ceremony that seemed to announce her gradual removal. Camilla asked whether more duties had already been reassigned without her knowledge. He denied any attempt to humiliate her, yet his careful words only deepened her fear. A senior courtier later described in a documented household account how she began requesting written details about her future residence, staff, precedence, security, and ceremonial rites. Precedence is the formal order that determines where royal figures stand, sit, and appear during official events, so her questions reached far beyond personal comfort. William soon learned that she had challenged the reception change and became alarmed that ordinary transition planning was being treated as an attack on her marriage and identity. After the ceremony, Camilla removed her gloves, placed them sharply on a table, and told Charles she would never again accept a major alteration without written guarantees about what came next. He stared at her, knowing that the threat was not empty. That promise led directly to the sealed directive, and to the confrontation in which the king would finally be forced to choose. When Camilla returned with the document in her hands, neither affection nor royal protocol could soften what followed behind the locked door. Camilla did not raise her voice when the confrontation began. That made the room feel even colder. She placed the directive before Charles, sat opposite him, and waited for the signature she believed their marriage had earned. But the king had already read every clause. When he refused, decades of loyalty, sacrifice, resentment, and fear erupted into one question. Had he already decided that William mattered more than she did? Camilla called the request practical. She said it would prevent confusion, protect her dignity, and stop future disputes over her residence, staff, ceremonial role, and place within the household. Charles did not move. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, but that position does not allow one person to restrict the authority of the next sovereign. He told her that no private agreement between husband and wife could control William's future decisions, especially when the document reached into royal appointments and ceremonial power. Camilla's restraint cracked. She accused him of allowing the prince's unresolved feelings about the past to determine what would happen to her once the king could no longer defend her. Charles warned her not to turn a constitutional question into an old family grievance. A constitutional question, in plain terms, is a decision about how royal authority is legally and institutionally exercised, not simply how relatives feel about one another. He admitted that he understood her fear of becoming irrelevant, but he said fear could not create a second throne beside the heir. Camilla stared at him, then asked the question he had been dreading. Had William already seen the document? Charles hesitated. That pause answered her, before his words did. The prince had been consulted. Worse followed. The monarch revealed that his son would soon chair a private transition group, a small planning body responsible for future household structures, ceremonial duties, and the allocation of royal residences. Camilla pushed back her chair and stood. Charles remained seated. "Have you already given my place to William?" she asked. He closed the folder and answered, "I have given him the responsibility that comes with what he will become." Her anger fell away. Sadness replaced it, because she finally understood that her husband was not surrendering to advisors or palace pressure. He believed the crown demanded this choice. Charles watched her absorb that truth, knowing it wounded her more deeply than any accusation could. The confrontation settled his position, but it opened a more dangerous question. How much authority had already moved into William's hands? The answer was hidden not in the argument itself, but inside the authority Charles had quietly prepared to place in his son's hands. The most consequential part of Charles's decision was not the unsigned paper left on the table. It was the document stored in a separate red folder, one Camilla had not been shown. That file granted William a new role in shaping the monarchy's transition, allowing the heir to review decisions that once flowed only through the king's household. It was not an abdication, but to those inside the palace, it felt like power moving. Charles had expanded his son's involvement slowly, first through private briefings, then through staffing discussions, ceremonial planning, and long-term household decisions. Health concerns, growing pressure, and the weight of an unforgiving schedule had made informal preparation too dangerous. Transition planning, the structured process used to prepare the next reign, could no longer depend on scattered conversations or promises made behind closed doors. The new authority did not transfer sovereign power, meaning the legal authority that still belonged fully to the king, but it gave William real influence over future staff, residences, ceremonial roles, and the priorities that would shape the monarchy after Charles. The prince did not feel victorious. He felt trapped by the history attached to every choice involving Camilla. Any restriction could be called revenge for his mother. Any concession could be seen as weakness before his reign had even begun. Charles feared his son might become too rigid, while William feared his father's emotional hesitation would leave behind arrangements strong enough to divide the next royal household. Then he opened the sealed file. One clause changed everything. No future privilege could be made irreversible without the heir's written consultation. In simple terms, Charles could not permanently protect a role, residence, or power that would later limit his successor. The wording directly blocked the guarantees Camilla had demanded. The future king read the date twice and realized the clause had been drafted before she submitted her directive. His father had anticipated the conflict. The choice had already been made. Charles slid the red folder across the desk. William did not open it at once. He placed both hands on the cover and asked whether the monarch understood what accepting it would do to the family. The king answered with quiet exhaustion. He said he was asking his son to protect the crown from decisions he himself could no longer postpone. William finally opened the folder, but the burden settled before he read another line. Camilla still believed the argument had been about one refused request. She did not yet know how much authority had already shifted, or how long Charles had been preparing for it. Once she learned the full extent of William's role, the royal truce would not merely weaken, it would begin to collapse. By the following morning, altered schedules, cancelled conversations, and one devastating reaction revealed that the consequences had already begun. The palace did not announce a crisis the next morning. There was no statement, no cancelled engagement, and no visible confrontation. Yet those closest to the household immediately sensed that something fundamental had broken. Camilla declined breakfast with Charles. William postponed a private briefing. And when an aide delivered the revised transition schedule, one name had been removed from a meeting Camilla had expected to control. Staff were told to treat the changes as routine administrative adjustments, but no one believed that explanation. The new schedule separated present royal duties from future planning discussions, meaning Camilla would remain beside the king in her current role, while decisions about the next reign moved increasingly toward the prince. A household restructuring meeting, the process used to decide future staff, responsibilities, and lines of authority, would now proceed without her. The omission cut deeper than the unsigned directive, because it proved the refusal had already produced real consequences. Camilla sat alone at a breakfast table prepared for two, and watched an untouched cup of tea grow cold. Charles had left a handwritten note beside her place. She removed it without opening it. When he later tried to speak with her privately, she told him that every new explanation only made the decision sound more deliberate, and therefore more painful. The monarch insisted he had never intended to humiliate her, but she answered that intention no longer mattered, once exclusion had become policy. A member of staff later recorded in a confidential household account that the Queen asked whether her private papers and personal correspondence were protected from review under William's new authority. The question revealed how quickly disappointment had turned into fear. She no longer worried only about ceremonies or residences. She worried that every part of her life could soon be examined by a future household she did not control. William faced a different danger. A senior advisor warned him during a documented briefing that opposing Camilla too visibly could create public sympathy for her, and make his actions appear driven by personal revenge rather than constitutional discipline. The future king understood the trap. If he moved too softly, the next reign could inherit divided authority. If he moved too harshly, old wounds would return and define him before he ever wore the crown. He instructed his advisors that no decision involving Camilla could be made without written justification. Fairness had to be visible, not merely claimed. Still, the silence between them hardened with every passing hour. Then William made the one move no one expected. He asked to meet her alone, without advisors, secretaries, or Charles standing between them. William and Camilla finally faced the history neither had ever been able to discuss openly. The private conversation between William and Camilla began without ceremony. No papers were placed on the table. No aides waited inside the room. For the first time, the future king and his stepmother spoke not as rival centers of royal influence, but as two people shaped by the same complicated family history. William arrived prepared to defend the crown. Camilla arrived expecting condemnation. Neither anticipated the confession that would change the meeting. William had requested the conversation because he understood that every message passing through Charles was making the mistrust worse. If they continued speaking through the king, suspicion would harden and future cooperation would become impossible. Camilla agreed reluctantly. She believed the prince intended to dictate the terms of her reduced role, not understand why she had demanded written protection. He began carefully. The directive, a formal written instruction designed to preserve specific rights, had frightened him because its clauses reached into the authority of his future reign. William told her that he did not want to erase her from the family, but he could not accept an arrangement that might restrict decisions over residences, ceremonies, appointments, and household access once the crown passed to him. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then her restraint broke. She admitted that the demand had been driven by fear, not ambition. The moment Charles could no longer protect her, she believed decades of loyalty would be dismissed as temporary, uncomfortable, and ultimately worthless. William's anger shifted. He confessed that his shock had not come only from the document. It came from discovering how long his father had allowed the uncertainty to grow, without forcing an honest conversation between them. Camilla then revealed something he had not expected. She had never believed every clause would be accepted. During their unrecorded private exchange, she explained that the wording was deliberately extreme because she feared a polite request would be delayed, softened, and eventually ignored. That admission changed the room. William moved the unsigned directive aside. He told her directly that he would not guarantee influence over his reign, but he would personally guarantee dignity, security, and respect within the family. Camilla's expression softened when he separated two things she had treated as one: protecting her place as Charles's wife and preserving her authority after his reign. She could retain the first without controlling the second. No apology erased the past, and no promise removed every fear. But the conflict finally became human instead of institutional. Their agreement could not stop the leak already moving beyond palace walls. It did, however, change how both would face what came next. When the first headline appeared, the palace braced for a public war, unaware that the two people at its center had already reached a painful understanding. By sunrise, the private meeting had become a national spectacle. The story was no longer confined to sealed folders and guarded corridors. Television studios opened with images of Charles, Camilla, and William, placed side by side beneath one explosive question: had the king chosen his heir over his wife? Yet the loudest moment came outside Buckingham Palace, where one newspaper front page transformed a family argument into a judgment on the monarchy's future. Commentators divided almost instantly. Some described the king's refusal as constitutional responsibility, arguing that no private promise should restrict the authority of the next sovereign. Others called it a personal betrayal, insisting that Camilla had stood beside Charles through years of scandal only to be denied security when she needed it most. A sovereign is the reigning monarch who holds the crown's formal authority, making any attempt to control a future reign far more serious than an ordinary family agreement. Inside the palace, the communications team prepared a short statement centered on unity, continuity, and the normal transfer of royal duties. Continuity means keeping the monarchy stable as responsibility gradually passes from one generation to the next. But those careful words could not contain the emotional damage. Charles felt exposed and furious. A private confrontation between husband and wife had become a public test of his love for Camilla and his confidence in William. The prince faced a different fear. He worried that the leak would reopen the deepest wounds of his childhood and make every future exchange with his stepmother appear calculated, cold, or driven by revenge. Then one detail changed the palace's concern into alarm. The leaked, documented account described the exact moment Charles closed the folder after refusing the directive. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the room, or someone briefed immediately afterward, could have known it. Outside Buckingham Palace, commuters and tourists gathered around a newspaper stand displaying the front page, "The King said no. William takes control." A broadcaster called it the clearest sign yet that the monarchy had entered a generational transition. Camilla could have demanded an immediate denial. Instead, she told the king not to challenge the central truth, warning that an aggressive response would revive the dispute and destroy the painful understanding she had reached with William. Charles watched the coverage, reached for the remote, and switched off the television. Then he apologized to his wife for allowing uncertainty to turn her private fear into a national controversy. She accepted the words without pretending they erased the damage. The world believed it had witnessed a royal rupture, but the real verdict would come after the headlines faded. Behind the public storm, the three central figures returned to the same question that had started everything. What must be preserved? What must be surrendered? And what could finally be forgiven? The final outcome was neither Camilla's victory nor William's revenge. Charles did not sign the directive, and the authority granted to his son was not withdrawn. The crown's future remained protected from private guarantees that could bind the next reign. But inside the family, something equally important changed. Camilla received security without permanent power. William accepted responsibility without humiliation. And Charles finally confronted the cost of delaying the truth. Charles formally confirmed that his son would continue leading transition planning, the structured process used to prepare the monarchy's duties, staff, residences, and authority for the next reign. The decision established one unbreakable principle: the future household had to remain under the control of the sovereign, who would eventually inherit it. Camilla withdrew her original directive and accepted a narrower written arrangement covering her security, residence, staff support, and dignity as the king's wife. It protected her life without granting influence over William's future household. Charles then turned toward her and apologized. He admitted that his silence had allowed uncertainty to become fear, and that fear had pushed her toward a demand he could never accept. Camilla listened without interruption. She had wanted permanence, but she finally understood that ceremonial control could never guarantee belonging. William faced his father next. The prince said accepting transition authority did not mean replacing him, and he promised the queen consort that the next reign would not be built through humiliation, retaliation, or punishment. Protecting the crown, he now understood, did not require stripping another person of humanity. The meeting that had appeared to divide the monarchy forced all three of them to separate private pain from public duty for the first time. Charles chose constitutional continuity, meaning the stable transfer of royal authority without private arrangements limiting the next sovereign. William chose restraint over revenge. Camilla surrendered her demand for lasting influence in exchange for dignity, security, and protection within the family. The king placed the original unsigned directive inside a private archive, a secure collection where sensitive royal records are preserved. Camilla watched him close the box while William stood beside them. No one celebrated, but no one walked away. She left saddened, yet no longer terrified of complete erasure. The future king left burdened, but clearer about the monarch he intended to become. Charles remained behind, relieved that the truth had finally been spoken. What stunned William was not merely Camilla's request, it was the realization that the monarchy could no longer survive through delayed conversations and private assumptions. The palace survived because power was clearly transferred, fear was finally acknowledged, and three wounded people chose a settlement that protected both the future crown and the fragile family standing behind it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.